So today is just a short discussion on Dave's network and actually how we plan to pivot the YouTube channel. And so we're going to talk a bit about podcasting, and we're going to talk about pivoting the channel. So I'm going to start with the whole topic of pivoting the channel first. We started off the channel with a cooking channel. And that was way back, I would say, about 10 years ago or so, and there's a long story behind that, and I'll do that in another podcast someday. But anyway, the channel had changed, and we went through a period of time 10 years ago, and we did a number of cooking videos, probably 20, 30 cooking videos, and then went on to pursue something else and just kind of let that sit dormant for a number of years. Then I came back periodically, especially within the last 2 or 3 years, and started doing a few more videos, a lot of them specifically on some traveling, some hotel reviews, as you can see if you flip back through the YouTube channel. Now I'm starting to go more in the direction of podcasting, and it's going to be a podcast / YouTube channel because I believe, there's validity and there's interest in both of them. I honestly believe the history of YouTube and, the history of podcasting is very fascinating in and of itself, but the future of both of these is going to change, I believe, dramatically in the next year or 2 or 3 to come. And I'll explain that in another podcast. So the pivot or the direction of this channel and the podcasting is basically going to be discussion, and we're going to be talking more about podcasting. And I'm going to talk about in a few minutes of the type of podcast we're going to be doing and some of the guests that we're going to have on. So that's going to be that's basically the direction we're going to be heading in today. Now, I think the actual cool thing about podcasting and the actual secret about podcasting and, something that Joe Rogan does, and he does it, remarkably so, incredibly bloody well. I don't think anybody can hold a candle to him, but, is to talk about what you want to talk about and talk to the people you want to talk to and just engage in a conversation. Don't worry about a friggin' script. Don't worry about any damned, agenda or anything like that. Come up with a topic, and once you start talking about the topic, engage the people. And the podcast inevitably, if you do that, will come out well. We have a couple of really cool podcasts coming up. One of them is going to be with Diane Thompson, and Diane is a self-published author. She's living in Kingston, but she came up through World War II, and her life was just one huge adventure. So we want to get together with Diane and talk about her adventures through life. Her book is absolutely fascinating, called Road to Ithaca, and if you ever get a chance, just grab it up and read it. And then in another podcast, we plan to get together with the Big Family Homestead, and we plan to get together with Brad there. And Brad's got a lot of interesting perspectives on life and a lot of interesting, topics he comes up with and talks about it. And Brad comes at things from a very, a very religious point of view, a very evangelical Protestant point of view, where I have the same theories as Brad and a lot of the same thoughts as Brad, but I tend to come at things a little differently from a little different perspective. Not so much of a religious perspective, but my own philosophies and my own ways of thinking. So if we kind of marry those two and mash them together, just a really fascinating podcast. Both podcasts I anticipate are going to be an hour, 2 hours long. Now, something I do have to mention as a qualifier, I haven't really talked to Brad yet, so I'm going to contact him, but hopefully he'll be game for this, and we can set something up in the near future. We want to do some on-the-road podcasts, and one of the podcasts I would really, really love to do is a podcast on the homeless, but not just, traveling and up and down the road and filming, homeless sites and looking at shelters, but to actually find some homeless people to actually interview and, put a mic in front of them and a set of headphones on and, just have a conversation for an hour or two of, life on the street and how they became that way and what life is like and where they intend to be, if any place in a few years. But point being that a podcast is just something to engage in a conversation and, and it should be to a listener like eavesdropping in on a fascinating conversation where you can just, sit there and kind of formulate your own opinions in your own mind, but be a passive listener. Another fascinating topic of conversation is religion. I mean, you look around the world and you see how many religions there are and how they've affected mankind over the centuries. I mean, they've begun wars. They've started many joyous events. They've affected people's lives. They've started cultures. They've ended cultures. Religion is just an absolute fascinating topic. Something that's very near and dear to my life because when I was about 19, I joined the Pentecostal church and I was a member of that church for a good 5 years. I went to their Bible college, did some preaching, did some youth pastoring, been involved in different forms of ministry in that particular church. And that was absolutely fascinating. And I can say it changed my life in many ways for the better. So religion, to interview different ministers and people from different faiths and cultures and talk about, their particular religion, how it's affected their lives and their perspective of the world and life in general would be another absolutely fascinating, wonderful concept for a podcast. And next one up for discussion would be small towns. And you could say to me, what? Small towns? What could conceivably be interesting about a small town? Well, I have some awesome footage of my town where I grew up, a little place called Maynooth with a population of probably, 700, 1,000 people proper, within the hamlet or village itself. And it was really interesting growing up there. And throughout this video, when I do show it and I do the podcast, I'm going to try and do the video and a podcast at the same time so you could actually, go through it and get something from it without the imagery. Of course, the imagery would be a lot better. However, having said that, there's certain dynamics to a small town, especially when I grew up back in the late 70s, early 80s when I was a teenager there. But you drive through them and you think, oh, yeah, well, you blink and you go through these small towns. If you're lucky, you might see a general store. It might be open. In all probability, in this day and age, it's probably closed. And you say, okay, well, I had to reduce my speed down to 60 and I managed to get through it, so we'll just buzz on to where we're going. Not to think back of, 50, 60 years ago, even 10 years ago, when that small town was a thriving place. Many of them, if it was a place like Maynooth, it had its own industry, its own ecosystem, its own political system, its own just about way of life. And those small towns are absolutely fascinating. So I honestly believe before a lot of these old-timers are gone, and with them, the history will be gone because there's nothing recorded in the books. It would be critical and absolutely incredibly interesting to talk to them and to talk about their way of life 50 years ago and what the town was like 50 years ago or even 100 years ago before there were even cars driving around when they were going in, horses and buggy and horseback and whatever. I know these people wouldn't be around at that point in time, but they would have some ancestry that was there. So that would be another great topic for discussion in these podcasts. So, my listeners, having said that, it kind of gives you an indication of where Dave's network is going as a YouTube channel and a podcast channel combined into one. So, my goal is that you will be able to listen, or if you're so inclined to go to YouTube, you'll be able to, see the imagery and see me speaking, but you can either do both. I know I just love listening to podcasts when I'm driving in my car, driving along. I mean, music gets tiring after a while, so you gotta have some other form of engagement or some other form of entertainment when you're sitting there steering the car. So that gives you a general idea of where we're going. This is podcast 0001, I'm calling it, on Dave's network. It's going to be available, I hope, on Apple and Spotify. It will be available on Buzzsprout and also on YouTube. So we're going to definitely keep the podcast going. One other thing I do want to say is I'm going to continue to do podcasts. I'm no spring chicken right now. I'm 61 right now and plan to keep on going for a while, but I'm going to continue as a vlogger and a podcaster and engage in social media until the day I die. Probably my deathbed will be recording a video or doing a podcast of some sort. So this will be video 0001 just getting started on a podcast. I'm not sure what I'm going to title this. There'll be something in the title. And probably this podcast isn't the greatest, but it does give you some insight into me, into where I'm coming from. A lot of it will be based on my experience and my interests. And I'm sure, you'll find some interest in some entertainment in this. So I want to thank you for listening. Or if you're on YouTube, thank you for watching. And we will see you in 0002. See you later, guys.